And before we start, I want to thank our sponsor for this evening. Angela, thank you for sponsoring. And is there anything you want to share about why you're sponsoring or in honor of anything specific? Please. And in Spanish is totally fine. Yes. Well, thank you for that. And I'm not going to respond in Spanish, but I understand. But thank you for using your gratitude to help all of us benefit together. So thank you for that. And if anybody wants to sponsor in the future, you're more than welcome to. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to move the flowers because now I could see you all. So tonight we are continuing our series that we started last week, which is our women's summer series. And I just want to start off by saying that each class is completely independent. So if you missed the previous class, you can follow 100%. But if you'd like to catch up on previous classes, you're welcome to do so online. The recordings are all online. And as we spoke last week, and for those of you who saw the flyer, this series that we are doing is the biblical, historical women who inspired our lives from the Torah. So we have historical heroines and modern day lessons. So tonight we are going to be journeying 20 generations from last class. So it's only been 7 days, but we're going to jump 20 generations. Pirkei Avot tells us, for those of us who are on the Pirkei Avot series, we learned that there are 10 generations from Adam until Noach, and then 10 generations again from Noach until Abraham. So we're traveling from last week when we discussed Chava all the way to our first matriarch, the wife of Abraham, Sarah, which is 20 generations later. So tonight's class is going to be focusing on a woman who we know as Sarah. But that was not actually the name that she was given when she was born. So the woman that we know, our matriarch, Sarah, the first of our 4 imahot, our 4 mothers, was called 3 different names in her lifetime. And each of these names connect with a different stage in her life. And we are going to focus on these 3 stages and the lessons we can learn from her at each stage of her life. Does anybody know what she was called when she was born? No, that was name number 2. Caught you there. Anybody know her first name when she was born? It's a beautiful name. I actually taught a student of mine who had this name. Her name was Yiska. Yiska was a beautiful girl. She is considered one of the most beautiful women in biblical history. Physically, she was stunningly gorgeous. And her life was very modern. Now, obviously, modern is relative, compared to today. But her life, the city that she grew up in, the city was called Or-Kastin, was a very cosmopolitan, progressive city. In fact, archaeological finds that were discovered in that area in recent times give us a glimpse into the fact that there was a very educated population in the city. And she was gorgeous. In fact, the name Yiska is connected with that. Yiska means vision, the ability to see. And she was given this name because everybody would look at her. She was beautiful, she was attractive, everybody looked at her, and she was a sight a beautiful vision. And on a spiritual level, her name Yiska is also connected with spiritual vision, because from a very young age, she had prophecy. In fact, Sarah is one of the 7 women. In Hebrew, they're called the Neviot, the 7 women who experienced prophecy. We know that Miriam, Queen Esther, there were 7 women, and we will learn about them, who were prophetesses. And Sarah was one of them. And so she had spiritual vision, which is also what the name Yiska connects with. So she was physically beautiful and a vision of beauty, and she had spiritual vision, prophecy as well. And let's be honest, she could have married anyone she wanted because everyone was attracted to her. And she had her pick. Any man would have been thrilled to marry her. I mean, if we were putting it in today's day, she would have been Miss Orkastin, the beauty of the entire city. And yet, she married Abraham. Who was Abraham? Abraham was a person who grew up in a very similar lifestyle. A world where everyone served idols. Everyone practiced idolatry. And he discovered God. He discovered monotheism. And he didn't just discover it as a personal thing. He made it his life's mission to teach everyone else around him about God. In fact, from a young age, he was getting into real big confrontations because of it. We know that Abraham was not a very shy character, and he was very resourceful. When he was a very young boy, he was manning his father's shop. His father was an idol worshiper, and his father actually sold statues, idols. And he would constantly argue with his father and try to convince him that this was ridiculous and, only God could have created the world, and these statues have no value and have no power. And he was once managing the shop, and his father left him alone, and he went around, he took a hammer, and he broke every single idol. And he shattered everyone in the shop besides for the big idol that stood in the middle. And this was the one that his father worshipped. And he took the hammer and he put it into the hand of his father's big idol. And his father came into the shop, and his father sees that everything is shattered on the floor, and he says, "What did you do?" He says, "Oh no, it wasn't me. It was this idol." He got angry. He shattered all the other idols. And his father starts screaming at him, "Are you crazy? You know that this idol can't do anything. What are you blaming it on an idol?" And he looks at his father and he says, "If an idol can't smash another idol, how is it providing for all your needs? Why are you worshiping an idol that can't even smash another idol?" And this was his way of, telling his father that his beliefs were worthless and that his belief was not based on anything rational, anything real. And this led to Abraham's first test, the first major obstacle that he encountered, which was really a risk of his life, because his father was so angry. He took him to the king, and the king was so threatened by a child, a young adult who was preaching an idea that was completely foreign to everything that they stood for, their entire society stood for, that they threw him into a furnace. And he was ready to give up his life for this. And our sages tell us that the furnace only surrounded him, but did not actually consume him, and he was safe. And when they went to retrieve his body, they found him alive and well in the furnace. And this was the first radical move that Abraham made in proclaiming his belief, which was extremely controversial. And he went to live in the middle of the desert. And he was obviously a very charismatic, magnetic personality. And people were drawn to him. But that's not why Sarah married him. She didn't marry him because she was completely smitten by his personality. She married him because she found someone who shared the same beliefs that she did. Sarah also, back then when she was still called Yiska, she also believed in God. We know that because she experienced prophecy. She heard the words of God. And she found a partner that she could share this mission with. And when she married Abraham, she shed the persona of Yiska because she didn't want to be someone who lives her life impressing other people. She didn't want to be the vision of beauty that everybody looks at because that was completely based on her externals. She wanted to live a life that was based on her values. And so the name that she is given is called Sarai. Now, Sarai in Hebrew means my princess. That's what it means. And Abraham called her this because she was his princess. She was actually his partner. He was the prince of God, and she was his princess. They were partners. And later on in her life, she evolved into becoming Sarah, attaining the level of spiritual greatness that made her Sarah, which means the princess of Hashem, the princess of God. So she went from being someone who was noticed and valued for her externals, and she evolved into someone who was a princess. So let's look at the Torah's perspective of a princess. Anybody heard a princess being spoken about in Torah? When do we ever talk about a princess? Do you like princesses? You do. Okay. Well, today I was at the doctor with my daughter. She's 3. And when she finished with her checkup, she behaved very nicely and she got to choose a sticker. And all she wanted was the princess sticker. Every girl wants to be a princess. Everyone wants to be a princess. But what is the Torah's perspective of a princess? Anybody ever heard a pasuk, a part of the Torah, talk about a princess? Well, princesses are in the Torah. Yes, indeed. It says in Tehillim, in the book of Psalms, Kol kevuda bat melech penima, which in Hebrew means all of the glory and the honor of a bat melech. A bat melech literally means the daughter of a king, which is a princess. A daughter of a king is a princess. All of the glory and honor of a princess is, the Hebrew word that's used is penima. Penima means within, is inside. Now, the word penima could be translated in a few different ways, and they all sound very similar, but with very, very specific nuances. We can say inside. We can say hidden, underneath. We can say within. They all sound pretty much the same, but they're very different. And this pasuk is one of the sources for modesty. That the beauty and the glory and the honor of a Jewish woman, a princess, the daughter of a king, which means the daughter of God, is inside. And many people take that to mean that Jewish women belong inside. Now, if you put it together with a story of Sarah that I'm going to share with you now, it seems pretty obvious why many people might think that. When Abraham, and I'm going to remind you this, and I'll say this several times, this is not historical class. So the anecdotes that I share are not always in historical order. So we might skip around a little. But when Abraham was 99 years old, he had a brit milah, he was circumcised. And this was an incredible sacrifice. He was at a very advanced age. And since Abraham and Sarah were known for their hospitality, there were many travelers that always came by, and they were served, and they were treated with the utmost respect and hospitality. And that was one of the ways that Avram and Sarah would bring them close to God, because at the end of the meal, they would say thank you. And Avram would say, no, don't thank me, thank God, and so on and so forth. And when Abraham was 3 days after his Brit Milah, God made it very hot outside so that no traveler should be traveling, and he wouldn't have to work hard for his guests. But Avram was sitting outside and he wanted guests, and God sent 3 angels. They were dressed as men, and 3 angels appeared in front of Avram's tent. Each angel had a different job. Now, angels are not like women. They cannot multitask. An angel is only brought down into the world for one mission at a time. So there were 3 of them because they each had their own mission. One of them he was given the task of healing Abraham. The second one was going to lead the destruction of Sodom. And the third one was to give Sarah the news that she would have a child. And when they approached, the angel asked Abraham, where is your wife Sarah? Eifo Sarah ishtacha? And Abraham responded, she's inside, she's in the tent. And this phrase, that she is in the tent, is also brought as a further proof that women belong inside. Sarah, the quintessential Jewish woman, the epitome of what we all should aspire to be. Where can she be found? In her tent. So does that mean that if Sarah was in her tent and the glory of a woman, of a Jewish princess, is inside, does that mean we should just stay home, pregnant and barefoot? Is that our calling? Well, ladies, you've met me. The answer is definitely no. But not just no. We need to understand what this story means and what these ideas that are brought in Tehillim about a Jewish princess actually mean, so that we can be the epitome of what a Jewish woman actually should be. So let's start off with the phrase in Tehillim. Kol kevuda bat melech penima. All of the glory of a Jewish woman, of a princess, is within. That doesn't mean that in order for her to be beautiful, she needs to be within. It means that her beauty comes from inside of her. Our value as women comes from the standard of our soul. Our value is not determined by external factors. And that is something that we really often forget. You know, when I got married, my mother-in-law gifted me with a set of silver candlesticks. In fact, it's very common in religious circles that the bride receives a set of candlesticks from her groom or her groom's family, to light the Shabbat candles in her home. And several years ago, my sister-in-law was getting married, and she was looking at silver candlesticks as well. And we were discussing the price of silver. And the disparity within the prices was extreme. In 7 years, the candlesticks, the same size, the same amount of silver, were a completely different price. They had completely different value. Now, what determines the price of silver? So many external values. So the value of this object is predicated on external factors that we don't control. And what's interesting is that depending on when you buy this silver, you might pay a lot or you might pay a little, but the object is the same. Its value changes. And you know what? With women in society, it's pretty much the same thing. The standard of women for being productive, educated, today versus 100 years ago, even 20 years ago, is completely different. What's considered a successful woman today is very different than what was considered a successful woman 100 years ago. Different style of clothing was considered appropriate. Different levels of education were considered valuable. Different lifestyles were considered successful. And if we look at women throughout history, it seems like external factors set the standard of what a successful woman should be. So you cannot be the same successful woman today than my grandmother was 100 years ago. It wouldn't be possible because the standards of society dictate the value of the woman. Isn't that sad? But guess what? That is not the standard and the value of a Jewish woman. And that is what Tehillim, what David HaMelech, King David, was saying when he said that the glory of a Jewish woman is within. The value of us as Jewish women is determined by our souls. And that doesn't change. It doesn't matter what we do outside our homes. It doesn't matter where we live, what our level of education is, the number in our bank account, the way we dress. That doesn't determine our value. What determines our value is the standard of our soul, and that is constant. And that is exactly the same as the value of Sarah Imenu thousands of years ago. And so when Abraham said, "Where is Sarah?" She's in her tent. What does that mean? It means that she is in her own space. She is in her tent. And she is valued by the standards of her tent. What do we know about Sarah's tent? Other than that it's a great grocery store in Aventura. What do we know about Sarah's tent? Anybody tell me, what do we know about Sarah's tent? Yes, that's true. In fact, not only is it the first place that Shabbat candles are lit, but there were 3 miracles that permeated her tent. The first one was that her Shabbat candles remained lit all through the week. It was a miracle that her Shabbat candles were always lit. There were 2 other miracles as well. Anybody know? The challah, very good. Her bread remained fresh. Her challah remained fresh. There was blessing in her dough throughout the entire week. And it wasn't because of all the preservatives that were put inside. Like the challah that we have here, that is always fresh, which means it never really was. So the challah was really fresh. There was blessing in her dough. And the third miracle was the cloud of glory that was always hovering above her tent. So where was Sarah? Where is Sarah's place? In her tent. In the place where she brought miracles. You know, last week we spoke about the 3 mitzvot of women. And we spoke about how each of these 3 mitzvot are the idea that Chava taught us. These 3 mitzvot are also connected with the 3 miracles in Sarah's tent. Chala, labriut. Chala, Nida, the cloud representing the fact that the Spirit of God, the presence of God, permeated their home because their marriage was one that brought God into it. And Shabbat candles, These three miracles are all connected with the three mitzvot of women because she personified those three mitzvot. And that was the standard of her soul. That was the standard that determined her value. So not just where was she practically, I want to go speak to her, where could I find her? But no, where was she? What was her level? Where is her spiritual state? She is in the space that defines her soul. And this is the beauty of a Jewish woman, that we determine our value. Our value is not determined by what society expects of us. We can be anything we choose to be. But guess what? We don't have to be what everyone else expects us to be. There's a very big difference between being who we want to be and becoming what the world expects us to be. And for each of us, that's something different. And all of those are equally valuable. For the person who chooses to go out and have a career, for the woman who chooses to stay home with her children, for the woman who attempts to do it all, but must have a lot of help because otherwise it's impossible. And everywhere in between, whatever a woman decides to become, that does not determine her value. What makes a woman valuable is the standard of her soul, and the beauty of a Jewish woman is what comes from inside and radiates outward. Which brings us to a very fascinating story in the Torah. When Abraham and Sarah first are introduced to us in the Torah, she is 65 and he is 75. That's when we're first introduced to them. And we're introduced to them. Avram's name was mentioned before, but as a couple, when the story begins, that's where it was. Parshat Lech Lecha, when God tells Abraham and Sarah to leave their home. They are given this command to leave their home, the place where they had lived their entire lives, the place where they had inspired hundreds of people to believe in God. And they're told to just go. Lech Lecha. God told Abraham and Sarah to go. And he doesn't even tell them where they're going. And this was one of the major tests of faith that Abraham and Sarah experienced. That they were just leaving their hometown and traveling, following God blindly. And they did so with full faith and trust in God. And they came to the city, to the land of Canaan. And they came to the land of Canaan. And in fact, the Torah tells us that when they traveled, they took along with them all of the souls that they had created. Now, it's interesting that it says all the souls that they had created because they didn't actually have any children. So who are these souls that they created? First of all, our sages tell us that we learn from here that every single time a man and a woman are intimate within the framework of family purity, even if and even when a woman does not become pregnant, a soul is still created. Every single time within the framework of a Jewish holy marriage that includes Taharat HaMishpacha and Mikvah observance, a soul is created, which renders every intimate relation a beautiful holy experience. And so Avram and Sarah had been married for many years. They brought God into their home, as is evident in the fact that the cloud of God hovered above their tent. And so they obviously created many, many souls. And not just that, all of the people that they inspired and they brought close to God, and they taught about God and brought over to their side of not believing in idols, but believing in God, these people were also considered the souls that they had created. And there, Rashi tells us that Abraham was teaching the men and Sarah was teaching the women. So we see right here that Sarah was not a stay-at-home homemaker. She was a teacher, she was an educator, she was an inspiration, she was a leader. She had a role outside her home. And she did it with beauty and grace. And when they were forced to leave their homes because God was telling them to go, they faced this challenge with beauty, with beautiful equanimity, knowing full well that God was taking care of them. And they came to the land of Israel, which was then called the land of Canaan. And they were met with another challenge right then. The challenge was that there was a famine in the land, there was no food. And they had to continue traveling and go down to Egypt. And when they got to the border of Egypt, there was a conversation between Avram and Sarah. Now, I'm obviously not quoting verbatim. Avram turns to his wife and says, hey, we got a problem. What's the problem? You're gorgeous. Have you never noticed how long they've been married? And they had a beautiful relationship. He didn't notice that he was married to the most beautiful woman in the city? Obviously, he knew. But he never valued her for her external beauty. It was only now that they were coming to Egypt that he realized, hey, she's beautiful, it's going to be a problem. Why was it going to be a problem? Because Egypt was a place of complete immorality. And in Egypt, you like a pretty woman, you take the pretty woman. And Abraham wanted to protect his wife, but even more, he needed to protect himself. What happened? He turns to his wife and says, you're beautiful. They're going to take you. So he hid her in a box. But before he put her in the box, they made a plan. You know, apparently border control was pretty tight there, so there was a chance they'd look in the baggage. So just in case they find you, tell them that you're my sister. Now, why would they need to make a plan like that? Because practically what would happen was the Egyptians would see this gorgeous woman, they would want to take her, but they can't take a married woman. That would be wrong. So with pure Egyptian logic, they would kill him. Now she's not married anymore. Now they can take her. Sounds like a plan, right? Well, if you're Egyptian, it's a perfect plan. So what do? They put her in the box and they enter Egypt. And all of a sudden, the language in the Torah changes. All of a sudden, the Torah is calling Sarai Ha'isha, the woman. Now, previously, she had always been called by her name. And now, all of a sudden, she's just being called the woman, which already gives us insights into the way she was being viewed. Abraham never looked at his wife and considered her as just a woman, a source of pleasure. Abraham looked at his wife and saw her value, her name, her essence. But in Egypt, nobody cared what her name was, because all she was a pretty woman. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. All she was a pretty woman, a source of pleasure. Nobody cared who her name even was. And then when she was discovered in the box and she said that they're siblings, which let them not kill Abraham, she was taken to the king. The most beautiful woman should go to the king. And Paro wanted to have his way with her. And God afflicted Paro with diseases and plagues until he realized that I probably shouldn't be trying to be with this woman because it's a problem. But what's interesting is that Avram was never actually worried that his wife would be enticed by the charms of the king. He never once thought that his wife would stoop to any immoral behavior. And he was equally certain that God would protect her and there would be nothing to worry about. It was more his own life he was worried about, because he was so sure of her spiritual standing. And if we put that in perspective, by the way, if we think about how great and holy Abraham was, this story illustrates how Sarah was infinitely holier than Abraham even was. But we see from this entire situation that Abraham valued Sarai for the beauty that was on the inside. It was only in Egypt that the Torah references her outer beauty, because what she was valued for and what the Torah values a woman for is our internal beauty. And the outer beauty is only a reflection of the inner beauty that radiates from within. I'm going to ask a question, but don't answer too quickly, okay? Have you ever seen an ugly bride? No, I said don't answer too quickly. It's very hard to find an ugly bride. Every bride looks beautiful on her wedding day. Now, I really believe that every woman has beauty. I also am aware that some people are more conventionally beautiful than others, and some people need more makeup than others. Now, that was a very radical statement. I also believe that every woman is beautiful and should never feel the need to cover themselves with makeup. Makeup should only enhance your beauty, not make you beautiful, because you probably don't need it. But what is it about a bride that is always so beautiful? It's not because she has an entire glam team that makes her beautiful. It's because when a bride is so happy on her wedding day, that joy that comes from a place that is so deep within just radiates outward. You can have the most gorgeous, by fashion standard, model who's walking with what they call a model face, but is really just a sour face. Walking down the runway. They don't look pretty. They might have perfect chiseled features. They don't look beautiful. When someone is happy, they look beautiful. When someone smiles and laughs, they look beautiful. Because beauty is something that comes from inside. Beautiful people are not people that grace the cover of magazines. Beautiful people are people with inner beauty that radiates outwards. So when someone has a beautiful soul, they don't need makeup. And when someone's soul is so covered up with dirt and negativity, all the makeup in the world won't help their beauty shine. Because kol kevuda bat melech penima, the glory of a woman, of a princess, the daughter of God, is within. Our value is like the value of Sarah. It comes from inside. Now let's get back to that story for a minute. Remember when Abraham said that Sarah was in the tent? Well, the conversation wasn't over there. The angel came to Sarah, went into the tent and told her that she's going to have a child. Hello, welcome. Make yourself a plate. He told her that she is going to have a child. What was her response? Anybody? She laughed. Now, she wasn't laughing because she was mocking the idea, although the idea sounded pretty ludicrous. She was 90 years old. She was just told that she would have a child. She was married for years and struggled with infertility for years. The thought of her actually getting pregnant and having a child was beyond comprehension. And when the angel told her that she would have a child, she laughed. But it wasn't a laughter of mockery. And we know this because she did have a child, and her child's name was Yitzchak. Yitzchak comes from the word tzchok, which means laughter. And he was given the name because of her laughter. Now, the name of her child would only epitomize laughter if it was a positive thing. He wouldn't have been called that if it was a negative type of laughter. So the fact that he was called Yitzchak is because he was born from laughter. Now, what was this laughter? What was this response, the reaction of laughter? It was a place of true joy. You know, you can fake a smile, but it's a lot harder to fake a real laugh. Laughter comes from a place that's much deeper within. And the fact that her automatic response to this news was laughter is because her general response to everything in her life was laughter, was joy. And she had her fair share of struggles. We know that Abraham and Sarah were tested. Abraham had the 10 famous tests that he endured, and they were all tests that they endured together. She had her own tests as well. And these were challenging tests. We know that aside from, what we spoke about earlier, being kidnapped by a king, which by the way happened more than once. She wasn't just kidnapped by Paro, she was also kidnapped by Avimelech. Similar story, said they were sisters and brothers. He took her, didn't end up working out for the king so well, but still, think about how scary it is for a woman to be kidnapped by a king. The thought of seeing her husband again was nil. That was a very challenging experience. And then knowing that her husband would not have any heir because she can't have any children. So she had her handmaid get pregnant from her husband so that he should at least have a child. And watching her be blessed with children, how challenging that must have been for her. And then him growing up and being a terrible person. And then when she finally had her child, nobody believed that Yitzchak was Sarah's biological child. In fact, the Torah tells us that she used to go around nursing other babies just to prove that she had had a biological child, because nobody believed her. And in fact, by the way, Yitzchak was the spitting image of Abraham, because nobody believed that it was Abraham's child either, because he was 100 years old. So they needed to prove that the child was their own. That must have not been easy. And then Yishmael, who was Abraham's older son, was becoming a bad influence on Yitzchak, and she had to banish him from their home. And Abraham was not happy about that, and God had to intervene in that marital rift. And by the way, God's response to the situation when Sarah wanted to send Ishmael away because he was negatively influencing her son, and Abraham did not want to, and God said, and I think that every Jewish woman should have this as a banner in her kitchen or in her dining room or wherever. God said, whatever your wife says, you listen to her. We heard that a lot in my house growing up. My mother's name is Sarah. We use that a lot. Whatever your wife Sarah says, you listen to her voice. That's what God said. But that couldn't have been an easy decision. These were challenges that she endured. And in fact, the end of her life was equally tragic. We know the story of Akedat Yitzchak, when God told Abraham to sacrifice his son. This was his final test of faith. And he took his son Yitzchak, and he was already strapped to the altar, ready to be sacrificed when God said, okay, stop. Now I know you're fully believing. Now I know that your trust is implicit. And when they came back home and Sarah heard the news that her son, her one and only son, was almost killed, she died from the shock. And that was the end of her life. So Sarah had a life of challenges. And yet her legacy is Yitzchak, which means laughter. Her legacy, the parting message that she gives us, is to laugh. When life is challenging, we should just laugh. That is a lot harder than it sounds. That is a lot harder to do than to say. Because when life is difficult and we encounter a challenge, facing it with joy and authentic joy is so, so challenging. But you know what? We have that power within us. Because Sarah is not just a woman in the Torah that we learn about. She is our matriarch, our mother. And a mother is someone who passes things on to their children. And these traits are inherent in their children, whether they like it or not. What's something that your children have from you, other than your good looks? Okay. All right. Tell me, what is something that your children have inherited from you? Okay, that's a good one. I like it. We all have traits that we have inherited from our parents. And you know what? We have them whether we like it or not. And we can choose to use them or ignore them. We all have talents that we have from our parents. I can tell you my uncle is amazing with his hands. He is a builder. He can fix anything. In fact, his chosen career, he's a rabbi. And what he does is he actually flies around the world building mikvahs. He is a mikvah building expert. And he uses his talent with building. He could have become a top construction guy. He wanted to be a rabbi and be involved in holy work. And he builds mikvahs. And his children all have that. It's incredible. Some of them use that, some of them don't. But there's this trait. One of his sons is an incredible locksmith, and he can do anything with his hands. It's incredible. And it's something that he's born with because he has it from his father. We all have things that we inherit from our parents. They're just part of us. Sarah passed on this trait to us, which means it's inside of us. We have that ability to tap into it. And because we have that ability, it makes this goal of facing challenges with joy something that is in our reach. Just like we have the faith of Abraham within us, we have the faith and joy from Sarah within us. And when we face our challenges with joy, that is the strongest testament to our faith. How do we prove that we truly believe in God? When we're happy. Because everything that God does is good from God's perspective. From God's perspective, every single thing is good. The problem is that from our perspective, not everything seems good, which is why blessing that we give is that we should experience revealed good. Because to say that only good things should happen means Nothing, because everything that happens is good. But it should be revealed to us that we see the good, which is, by the way, why we say Shana Tova U'Metuka. At the beginning of the year, we say a happy and sweet new year. That not only should it be a good year, but it should taste good to us. That should feel good. It should be like honey, like sweet. So when we face our challenges with joy, we are proving that we believe that it's coming from God. Because if we truly believe that everything comes from God, then we know it's good. We have every reason to be happy. And Hasidic thought teaches us that the happiness is what brings about the blessings. When we think positively, we create a positive reality. Our existence is not a story that we are reading about. It is a story that we are a partner in creating. And we do our part to create our story by being joyful. And that is what Sarah teaches us. Sarah teaches us that the standard and the value that we possess comes from within ourselves. And when we truly believe that, it can outwardly be expressed with beauty and with joy. So l'chaim to always being like Sarah, and l'chaim to always facing our challenges with laughter and with joy. And ladies, remember, it doesn't matter what you do or what you don't do outside your home. What truly matters is the standard that you create in your tent. That could be literally in your home, and on a micro level, the home in our hearts that we each create where God can dwell. Let's make it a home where if Sarah would walk into, she'd feel comfortable. She'd see the candles lit. She sees the challah. She sees the bedroom that is a place of holiness. And it doesn't matter what kind of paintings are on the wall or if the light fixtures or the cell phones, because those she really wouldn't be able to connect with, right? If she would walk in, would she be able to understand what was going on? But those things would make her feel right at home. And that's what makes our tent like Sarah's tent. So l'chaim to that. If anyone has any questions, please unmute yourself, share any comments. And if anybody wants to share how they were like Chava this past week, I challenged you all last week. I'm challenging you this week to be like Sarah. But if anybody wants to share any experiences they had that were Chava experiences, please do. Don't all answer at once.